Hello friends, today we will discuss the situation on the front in detail for January 23rd, 2026. Let's move on to a detailed analysis of the situation on the line of combat contact. Let's turn to the map. Friends, if just yesterday in our review we noted a shortage of news from the front, then over the past day the situation has changed, as if in response to our words. A whole series of significant and successful offensive actions has taken place, and the overall total indicators of advancement for the day look quite decent. I will not delay and will immediately move on to the key event that occurred in the Dobropilia direction. Here, servicemen of the center group of forces were able to substantially expand the zone of control on an extended stretch from the settlement of Rodinska up to the city of Belitska. To understand the scale, the width of the offensive strip exceeded 8 kilometers. This figure in itself is impressive, but even more important is the fact that ARF units managed to enter a new settlement, the city of Belitske. We have already mentioned earlier that back in mid-December, Russian sabotage and reconnaissance groups began to infiltrate the city limits and test the strength of the Ukrainian army's defense. However, during that period, active assault actions were not conducted. Primarily, reconnaissance work was carried out. Now, a full-fledged assault operation has started. You can fix the date. On January 22nd, the Russian army proceeded to the assault of Belitske. At the same time, the first and quite serious results have already been achieved. Russian fighters managed not only to gain a foothold on the outskirts, but also to establish control over 5 streets at once: Skovoroda, Bohdan Khmelnytsky, Kotyubinsky, Shevtsov, and Gagarin. In addition, judging by the map, 6 multi-story buildings in the south of the city have been occupied. You must agree, the start is powerful. Belitska is a small city. Before the start of hostilities, about 9,000 to 10,000 people lived there. Nevertheless, here, as in Rodinske, there is sufficiently dense high-rise development. Therefore, one should not count on an easy walk, or on the fact that the city will pass under the control of the Russian Federation in a matter of days. This will not happen. Let me remind you how difficult the battles for Rodinsky were. This settlement was taken longer than Mirnohrad, although it would seem the scales of these cities are incomparable. I believe that the advance here will go faster than in Rodinske, since the main supply route from Dobropilia is under dense fire control. However, there is a nuance: the mine to the north of the city, which plays the role of a powerful defense hub. Consequently, to guarantee the breaking of the Ukrainian army's resistance, it is necessary to seize this mine. It is precisely on this task that the ARF troops are currently working. By the way, footage of combat work has appeared, where the Russian military caught the armed forces of Ukraine during rotation and destroyed an enemy pickup truck. I cannot demonstrate these videos here due to platform rules. As for Rodinsky itself directly, success was also recorded here over the past day. Fighters of the Russian army began to push the front line away from the city in a western direction. The maximum depth of the advance was 1 kilometer 250 meters. Of course, this is not yet enough to claim the complete safety of the city from counterattacks by the armed forces of Ukraine and to relax. Undoubtedly no. However, the process has been launched, and now it will be much more difficult for Ukrainian formations to break into the city, although such a possibility cannot be completely ruled out yet. What else happened at the front? Fierce battles continue in the area of Hryshyn. A peculiar positional exchange took place here. The Ukrainian army pushed back ARF units on the central street, forcing them to retreat by 500 meters. However, in response, Russian troops advanced 450 meters along Azovska Street and also took positions on Stepna Street. In addition, the zone of control south of the village was expanded by almost 2 kilometers. Along the M30 highway, the advance amounted to 1 kilometer 300 meters, and along the railway track, 1 kilometer 900 meters. This, undoubtedly, will allow the Russian army to increase pressure on Hryshyn from the southern flank in the future. At the moment, fierce clashes continue in the village itself, one might say, the hardest battles. It has not yet been possible to break the resistance of the Ukrainian army, so battles are being fought literally for every structure. Advancement is achieved with great difficulty. The battle for Hryshyn has been going on for more than a month, but less than half of the settlement is under ARF control so far. It has already been noted earlier that without establishing full control over Hrychin, it is impossible to guarantee the safety of Pokrovsk. Using this area to accumulate forces, soldiers of the Ukrainian army make sorties into the northern quarters of the city. To stop these actions, the ARF army needs to completely seize Hrychin, and only then will Pokrovsk be secured. If we look at the situation to the southwest, a colossal success has been achieved there. The width of the offensive strip exceeded 6 kilometers, which is a truly powerful dash for this sector of the front. Such rates have not been observed here before. However, in this case, not so much the numbers are important as the specific place and the final result. And the result was the establishment of full control over the Pokrovska mine. This is the largest coking coal mining enterprise in Ukraine. Battles for it continued for many months, and now the facility is under the full control of the Russian army. What does this mean? It means that now this fortified area will be used by the ARF army. Any mine in itself serves as an excellent defensive hub, and such a large facility is a fortification of double strength. Now its potential will work for the Russian military. In addition, it was finally possible to push Ukrainian units away from the borders of the long-suffering Kotlin. The advance amounted to 700 meters, but this is an important step. The confrontation in this area lasted almost a year. The settlement passed from hand to hand. Now the issue is finally resolved. The village is firmly held by ARF troops, and the front line has begun to gradually move away from it. Also, Russian fighters continue to approach the outskirts of Serhivka, which, along with Hrychin, is one of the key settlements. Over the past day, the advance towards the village amounted to just over 900 meters, and now the distance to the southern outskirts of Serhivka is about 2 kilometers. In the Dnipropetrovsk region, fighters of the Center Group expanded the zone of control in the area of Novopidorodne. On this, the measure of a sector of the front, they managed to occupy 2 streets in the eastern part of the village. As mentioned earlier, events are not being forced here. The ARF army is slowly but surely pushing through the Ukrainian army's defense, advancing inside the residential development. Further south, along the border with the Dnipropetrovsk region, the control zone was also expanded on a section 3 kilometers wide. In general, the day turned out to be much more successful than the previous 2. Over the past day, 24.6 square kilometers of territory passed under the control of the Russian army. This is a very worthy result. In the Kostiantynivka direction, units of the Russian army demonstrate advancement on the left flank, operating in the vicinity of the settlements of Stepanivka and Linivka. A difficult situation remains in the Sloviansk direction. Pockets of resistance are still recorded in Zakotne. The Ukrainian army puts up desperate resistance, not abandoning attempts to counterattack from the heights of the chalk slope. Assault groups of the armed forces of Ukraine periodically break into the village, striving to return the lost stronghold. The pace of the ARF troops' offensive is held back by the complex terrain, elevation changes, and weather conditions. Nevertheless, Russian units entered the western quarters of Ozern. However, it is currently not possible to gain a foothold in the settlement of Yuzhny. The ARF army carries out massive fire impact on logistical routes and positions of the Ukrainian army on the approaches to Kryvyi Luka. In parallel, active reconnaissance and study of the terrain are being conducted before the introduction of assault groups into battle. Fierce battles do not subside in Riznikivka. To support the advancing units, Russian troops widely use artillery and strike unmanned aerial vehicles. Advancement is also recorded along the heights west of Siversk. Combat clashes are taking place in the area of Minkivka, where a serious fortified area of the Ukrainian army is located. Establishing control over this village and the neighboring Holubivka will allow ARF troops to strengthen their positions near the M03 highway. With support from the eastern flank, from the side of Nikiforivka, this will ensure access to operational space practically up to Rai Oleksandrivka. Active battles continue in Nikiforivka itself. Rai Oleksandrivka is one of the key points on the Russian army's path to Sloviansk. Mastering this settlement will ensure a logistical and geographical advantage in this sector, which will significantly complicate the position of the AFU garrison directly in Sloviansk. On the Krasnye Lyman sector of the front, ARF units are fighting for Oleksandrivka, developing an offensive east of Korovy Yar and expanding the zone of control in the vicinity of Sviatohirsk. In the Kharkiv direction, the Russian army proceeded to the assault of Hravske, continuing offensive actions beyond Vovchansk. Developing success on the Vovchansk vector in the Kharkiv region, ARF troops advanced through the massif of the Tatar forest and reached the settlement of Hravske. Now let's discuss the political part. Donald Trump characterized the meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky as very short, less than an hour, but quite successful. He noted that the main signal for Vladimir Putin is the need to end the war, and announced upcoming negotiations between American representatives and the Russian leader. At the same time, the media noticed that after the conversation with Zelensky, Trump looked irritated. Zelensky himself spoke at the forum in Davos. In his speech, the Ukrainian leader, who is called a dictator in the text, complained that his call to Europe last year to learn to defend itself went unheeded. He compared the life of Ukrainians to Groundhog Day, noting that no one wants such a fate, but it has become a reality. Zelensky wondered why the president of Venezuela is prosecuted by the court, while Putin remains at large, and emphasized that Trump is imposing sanctions against the Russian Federation that are tougher than European ones. He also stated that without the USA, security guarantees are ineffective, and called for deploying European contingents in Ukraine after the truce. Zelensky reproached Europe for weakness, contrasting it with Trump's decisiveness, in particular in the issue of seizing tankers, and mentioned the dispatch of 40 soldiers to Greenland as an incomprehensible signal to the Russian Federation, China, and Denmark. In addition, a two-day trilateral meeting, Ukraine-USA ARF, in the UAE was announced without specifying the agenda. The situation in Europe is described as confusion in anticipation of changes from the US president. However, it is argued that Trump will not change. Despite words about love for Europe, he will not listen to its current leaders. The main problem of the EU is called the mentality and the lack of protection of its own interests, due to which Europe is turning from a political force simply into geography and traditions. Meanwhile, following the USA, France adopted the practice of detaining vessels. The French Navy, with the support of allies, intercepted an oil tanker in the Mediterranean Sea heading from Russia, which, according to Paris, was sailing under a false flag in violation of sanctions. Macron referred to the UN maritime law, the vessel is arrested, and proceedings are underway. Paris intends to fight fiercely against the shadow fleet, allegedly financing the war. This marks a new stage of pressure on Russian maritime logistics, and now Moscow's response is expected. It is also reported about a serious threat to all of Ukraine, including the western regions. Radars recorded the resumption of Russia's use of 9 M729 missiles of the Iskander M1 complex with a range of 1,500 km. Kiev sources claim that these missiles are capable of carrying a nuclear charge, and 24 launchers, with a total salvo of 96 such missiles, are deployed around Ukraine. In conclusion, the opinion of Yuri Podolyaka on Trump's behavior in Davos is cited. He believes that Trump acts like a businessman for whom not treaties. But deals are important, nothing personal. His eccentricity and hard pressure are a way to raise the stakes as much as possible to get what he wants. Podolyaka is sure that Trump is moving towards another deal concerning Greenland, and his demands are such. The USA views Greenland as part of North America and its potential territory, expressing readiness to buy the island. According to Western media, Washington and Copenhagen are conducting backroom negotiations in which Denmark is ready to concede almost everything to Trump: an indefinite lease for bases in any quantity and access to rare earth resources, except for the official legal recognition of the island as part of the USA. For Washington, such a deal would be a huge victory. However, Trump, following his maximum game style, does not stop there. Greenland residents have already been hinted that in the event of voting for accession to the USA, each of them will receive $1 million. This is a purely business approach, where there is nothing personal, but a calculation on luck remains. Meanwhile, Vladimir Putin, at a meeting with Palestinian leader Mahmoud Abbas, confirmed his readiness to contribute $1 billion to the Peace Council structure to support the people of Palestine and restore the Gaza Strip. However, the Russian president set a clear condition. These funds must be taken from Russian assets frozen in the USA by the previous administration. Dmitry Peskov explained that the contribution to the Peace Council requires the unblocking of these accounts. He emphasized that the freezing of assets is illegal. Moscow does not lose hope for their return and will use all tools for this, and it is time for the Kiev regime to take responsibility for itself. Political scientist Sergei Mikheyev believes that Trump is largely bluffing, as his numerous plans require more resources and time than he has. Although Trump strives for total control over the Western Hemisphere and will not concede anything to anyone, the implementation of Trumpism in the future remains in question. Europe, in the experts' opinion, has driven itself into a trap. Wishing to become an independent pole of power, it failed to get rid of US influence and at the same time spoiled relations with Russia. In conditions of resource depletion of the modern economy, the winner will be the one who creates a sovereign model. Regarding the Ukrainian conflict, Trump is interested in its speedy conclusion in order to record this as a political asset for himself. Mikheyev positively assesses the continuation of contacts between Moscow and Washington, but notes that any compromise will require bilateral concessions, and the situation will be difficult. If for Trump the main thing is to end the war, then for Russia the key issue remains the future structure of Ukraine. The Greenland issue, in turn, has already caused a split between the USA and Europe and will likely continue to provoke disagreements within the European Union. Sergei Mikheyev commented on the latest events at the forum in Davos. He started from the words of Deputy Chairman of the Security Council of the Russian Federation, Dmitry Medvedev, who noted that the event ceased to be meaningless and became interesting due to the shift of focus from Ukraine to Greenland. Mikheyev considers the current situation a direct consequence of the European Union's erroneous policy. A split has emerged within Europe. Some are categorically against concessions to Trump, others are looking for compromise options, for example, a treaty under which Greenland will formally remain Danish, but will actually pass under US control.